Hey everyone, so over the next couple of weeks, we are going to be talking about four of ancient China's dynasties. So before we can do any of that, we have to talk about what is a dynasty. So when we're talking about dynasties, what we're really talking about is something called an empire, which you might have heard or that might be a little more familiar to you. But a basic definition of a dynasty is when one family or a group of leaders rules over a place for many years consecutively. So to kind of give like a twist or an example of this, so if I was the king, so we have King Evarts here, and then I had a son, all right, and I died, my son would keep ruling, all right, just like monarchies, right? We know that these ancient civilizations were mostly monarchies because they were ruled by a king or queen that had unlimited power. So they were mostly absolute monarchies, which means they have full power, unlimited power to do whatever they want. So anyway, I'm the king, right? Then my son rules for, let's say 60 years. And then let's say he has a daughter, right? And let's pretend at the time daughters had the same power as sons, because we know back then a lot of times men and women didn't have equal power. So anyway, I ruled first, 50 years. 50 years after me, my son rules. And then for the next 50 years after that, my son's daughter rules, which would be my granddaughter. And then after that, my son's daughter's son rules. All right. I know that's really confusing, but all that's really saying is that the next kid in the family would keep ruling. So as long as that family keeps ruling, you would call that the dynasty of whatever family it is. So in this case, it would be the Evarts dynasty that would be ruling. All right. So when we're talking about dynasties, we're typically talking about one family that has the power in China and they're ruling for a lot of years from one family member to the next. Okay. So just a quick little blurb about dynasties there. So the four we're going to talk about this year, the first dynasty that we're going to talk about today, the Shang Dynasty, started in 1750 BCE, and then the very last dynasty, which we're not going to get to till next week, will end in about 220 CE. So we're going to be talking about in the next 2 weeks about 2,000 years of Chinese history. So it's going to be quite a bit. So hang on tight, right? So this is all going to take place about 3,000, 4,000-ish years ago at the start. So the four dynasties that we will talk about in sixth grade, we have the Shang Dynasty, which I'm going to talk about today. The Zhou Dynasty. I know it looks like Zhao, but it's pronounced Zhou. The Qin Dynasty, which does look like kin, but it's Qin, like your chin here. You can see the Great Wall here, which will be kind of the feature of the Qin Dynasty. Some of you might have heard of the Great Wall of China, so that'll be something that the Qin Dynasty created. And then the last one, I know I'm kind of blocking it, but that's the Han Dynasty, H-A-N, Han Dynasty. So as I told you, the Shang Dynasty starts in 1750. That's the one we're going to talk about today. And then the very last dynasty that we'll talk about next week is going to end all the way in 220 CE. So it's going to cross over that birth of Christ line. So a lot of history that we're going to try to cover in a couple weeks here. So let's start today with the Shang Dynasty. I put a tree here because it kind of makes me think of a family tree. So Shang Dynasty people had a very big value on family. Actually, a lot of ancient China has a huge value on family. And we're going to talk a little bit about ancestor worship in a little bit here. So you might have heard of ancestor worship, or maybe you've seen Mulan, and they have the whole scene when the ancestors come out and they give advice of what they should do with Mulan, right? So ancestor worship is a huge thing in the Shang Dynasty. That's kind of why I put the tree there as the symbol here. So the basics, this one starts in 1750 and it's going to end around 1040 BCE. So if you did the quick math there, it's about 700 years that this dynasty rules over China. So again, obviously that's not one person ruling for 700 years because no one's 700 years old, but a family that kind of rules and rules and rules and rules until another dynasty takes over. So the dates are kind of flexible. Obviously, this is ancient history, so that's kind of what we're going with. But you might see some sources that might be a little bit off as far as the years go. But around 1750 is when this is going to start. This is going to settle right around the Yellow River. So this dynasty is ruling right around the Yellow River, which I talked about in the previous Ed puzzle. So the Yellow River is one of the most important rivers in China, and that's where the Shang Dynasty is going to be kind of taking place. So in the Shang Dynasty, there was this capital city named Anyang. Okay, so in Anyang, you can kind of see a picture of how they believe it might have been laid out. Most of what we know, obviously, is from artifacts and archaeology. So they found a ton of artifacts around this capital city of Anyang. They found evidence of a palace, temples, workshops. Artisan workshops were a huge thing, and I'm going to talk about that in a second because bronze was a huge thing in the Shang Dynasty. Some homes, so kind of a typical setup of ruins here. They found that the king's palace was actually set upon a platform, and underneath that they found human bones. So they think that they actually had some type of human sacrifices and things below the ground of the palace where it was built, so that they might have used human sacrifices in the process there. And then they found all of these royal tombs, like 8 or 9 royal tombs of kings buried with servants and animals and foods and treasures. And I'm going to show you a picture of that in a second. That kind of reminds me of Egypt, right? They're burying these pharaohs with so many different things because they believe that they need them in the afterlife. So in China, they kind of believe a similar afterlife here, but they really believe that you need to please your ancestors and bury them with things that they need. So the government of China and the Shang Dynasty is going to be led by a powerful king. It's going to be an absolute monarch, full power, unlimited power. And the way that he holds that power, we know through force and fear with dictatorships, right, and absolute monarchies. So he has a very strong army. This army was known to be in constant warfare with other families and things that were trying to take over power. The army is kind of how the Shang Dynasty kept its power for over and over and over. And they just built up the army to try to overpower anybody that would try to, attack them or try to take over the power themselves. And then the bronze weapons I mentioned. So they were the first people to kind of realize how to make bronze. So they took copper, they took tin, and they figured out a way to mix it together to make a little bit more powerful material. So a lot of their weapons were made out of bronze, which helped their army remain strong. So the social pyramid of the Shang Dynasty is going to be similar kind of to some of the ones that we've talked about. At the top, we're going to have the king and his family, his relatives, so that makes sense. Right underneath the king, we're going to have nobles. So nobles are a little different. So nobles are going to be mostly the king's army, but also people that kind of work for the king. So that top upper class is going to be probably the higher homes, luxury, living lives that are pretty strong. That's the top two. In the middle class, we're going to have artisans and traders, which is kind of similar to traders. Again, it's just another word for merchants, probably a little bit easier to understand. So people that are making a lot of these things, we know that bronze is a huge thing. We're going to talk about the material jade in a little bit. So those materials, people that are skilled with those are a little bit higher up. Traders that are moving back and forth. Farmers, again, are going to be one of the biggest social classes because you need food to survive. And then in this social structure, we're going to have slaves as well, servants for the king, different things like that. So this is going to be kind of the ranking of the social pyramid of the Shang Dynasty. With religion, ancestor worship is number one. So before I get into that a little bit, you see this picture here as I talked about the royal tombs, right? So you see people going down to the tomb, but then you see all the different sacrifices and things that people were buried with. So we have inscriptions on the walls. There would be food and treasures buried inside of there. We have human sacrifices here because they believe that their kings needed servants in the afterlife and animals in the afterlife. There was chariots. So all of these things were buried with the king because this is a person that died, right? So the next ruler needed to please the ancestors, which is a past family member, so that they're going to bury them with all these things. So as I said, ancestors are just past family members that have passed on, and then you're trying to please basically your past family members that lived before you. They believe that ancestors can help you or they can hurt you. So if you don't bury them with these things, they believe your afterlife might not be as strong. And then they also found a lot of these oracle bones. Oracle bones are interesting because it's kind of the first evidence of writing, but then they also use these oracle bones to kind of communicate with their ancestors. This is kind of what one would look like. So they would kind of write on it and they would ask advice to their ancestors. And then kind of an interesting thing, a lot of times like a powerful noble or a king would take a heated needle or they would light a needle on fire and they would kind of trail it alongside the oracle bone, which is kind of be like a bone from an animal. And then wherever it would break or split, that was supposed to be a sign to what the ancestors were saying or giving advice on. So that's a little bit about kind of their worship and their beliefs and a little bit about ancestors and their belief in that. As far as art goes, bronze again is number one, but then jade. Jade's the second big material that's going to be popular in the Shang Dynasty. So with bronze, they're going to be making a lot of these vessels or different containers that they're going to hold things in. Again, the weapons are going to be made out of bronze, which are a little bit stronger, a little bit easier to fight with, and stronger in warfare. And then jade, they're going to be making a lot of things with. Jade is actually like a hard stone. And if you use jade, it was considered like a superior metal, so superior material. So jade is kind of like a gemstone. It's a very tough stone to break through, but it also has like a shiny appearance to it. So because of that, they actually thought it represented wisdom and kindness. They thought wisdom came from the strength of the material, the hardness of the stone, and then the kindness came from that smooth nature, that shiny nature of the jade itself. And then all good things come to an end. So in the Shang Dynasty, it actually ended around that 1000 mark of BC. there's various reasons that they think it ended. One of the reasons is that because they were in constant warfare all the time, that maybe their military over time just got weakened because of people that they were losing. So warfare can kind of break down your military. There was talk and evidence of a lot of overspending of their resources, so their economy kind of weakened. So if they had less money, they might not have been able to put as much money into things to protect themselves. There's also, I put in here, rumored corruption. If you don't know what that means, they believe some government leaders would actually try to steal some of the treasures and resources and money for themselves, which kind of also could weaken the economy. But then most ultimately, the Zhou dynasty took over. The Zhou dynasty is going to be the next dynasty we talk about, and you're going to kind of notice that a lot of times when one dynasty starts, that's because they took over the one before it. So the Zhou armies will kind of get a little bit more powerful here. They find a little bit of a weakness or a crack in the Shang dynasty and are able to take over, and then that's when that next dynasty starts, because a new family kind of takes control. So next week, we're going to get into the Zhou dynasty and the Qin dynasty. That's the one with the Great Wall of China. So be ready for that, and hope you enjoyed a little bit about the Shang dynasty here.